The night they brought him in, the razor-wire wind felt sharp enough to slice through bone. And inside ADX Florence, men who had once terrified entire cities suddenly looked small. This was Bombers Row, the most volatile hallway in the most controlled prison on American soil. A place where silence wasn't peaceful, it was pressurized, waiting to explode again. And if stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. The Bureau of Prisons never officially called it that, of course. But everyone inside knew the nickname. Down one sealed corridor, cell after cell held men responsible for some of the most devastating bombings in the country. Domestic extremists. Lone wolf radicals. Ideologues who once believed the world should burn to prove their point. Individually, they were dangerous. Together, they were a potential catastrophe. So when the newest arrival, known only in paperwork as inmate in 9174, stepped off the restraint chair and into the fluorescent glare, the air shifted. Guards later said it felt like dropping a lit match into a room full of fumes. He wasn't the most notorious prisoner the unit had ever held. But he had something the others didn't: unfinished business. His eyes scanned the corridor as if he already knew exactly who lived behind each soundproofed steel door. In ADX, inmates don't mingle, they don't talk, and they don't touch the world. But communication finds a way. For years, guards intercepted coded kites, tiny notes written on toothpaste-thin toilet paper, moving through the ventilation grates. Most were harmless. Some weren't. A few were so precise, so technical, that the FBI had to be notified. That's why a 9174 got placed here. Not because he was the worst, but because someone inside Bombers Row had been waiting for him. The unit ran like a machine built on paranoia. Every meal slot opened at the exact same time. Every shower was escorted by multiple staff. Every hour was documented to the minute. Even the air circulation was monitored for tampering. Still, the pressure inside this hallway felt unnatural, like the walls themselves were listening. On his second night, the disturbance began. A faint tapping, too rhythmic to be accidental, started echoing through the vents. It traveled up the row like a coded message. Guards logged the sound. Nothing actionable. Nothing they could trace. But the prisoners heard it with perfect clarity. Tap. Pause. Tap tap. Pause. A pattern, not a noise. A 9174 sat at the edge of his steel bunk, eyes locked on the vent. He wasn't confused. He wasn't startled. He simply nodded, just once, like he'd expected the message to come eventually. What he didn't expect was the response. 3 cells down, another inmate, responsible for a bombing so infamous it still airs on anniversaries, started screaming. Not words. Just raw terror. A sound so unhinged the corridor froze. Guards sprinted to the door, ordering him to back away from the glass. He didn't. He stayed in the far corner, trembling, whispering the same sentence over and over. He knows. He knows what we did. The panic spread fast. For days, inmates who never spoke started pacing their cells, staring at their vents, refusing meals. Officers ran extra rounds. Psych staff were called. No one could explain how one new prisoner had managed to destabilize an entire unit designed to break the strongest minds. But the truth became unavoidable when the tapping returned, louder this time, more deliberate, echoing through steel and concrete like a countdown. A 9174 stood up, walked to his door, and whispered something into the metal. And whatever he said was enough to send one veteran guard rushing down the hall for the supervisor. Because suddenly, it wasn't the prisoners who looked afraid. It was the staff. The lieutenant spent half the night replaying the guard's trembling confession. "You buried the wrong evidence." The words didn't fit the isolation unit. They didn't fit ADX at all. Prisoners here shouldn't know anything about sealed files, suppressed interviews, or internal mistakes. But a 9174 had spoken the sentence with unsettling certainty, like he wasn't guessing, but reminding. From that moment, Bombers Row shifted from tense to volatile. The inmates in this corridor weren't gangbangers or power brokers. They were extremists, loners, purists of ideology. Their loyalty wasn't to each other, it was to their causes. But information? That was currency. And if someone believed that 9174 held a piece of truth that could damage them, cooperation could turn into sabotage fast. The first sign came the next morning. A guard sliding breakfast trays noticed a folded strip of legal mail paper wedged beneath a 9174 slot. It wasn't his handwriting. The message was short: "He's not who you think." Staff treated it as attempted communication and logged it. But by noon, more notes appeared, behind the shower door, under a cleaning cart, tucked into a vent grate. Different handwriting. Same urgency. The deal was years ago. Stop digging. Check the transcripts. Intelligence officers suspected an internal power play. Psych staff suspected shared paranoia. But neither theory explained how these men, sealed in concrete boxes 23 hours a day, were passing messages at all. Then came the second incident. Inmate C-4821, a bomber whose case still sparks documentaries, refused to give his hands for cuffing after recreation. Instead, he leaned toward the slot and whispered to the officer, "You're searching for contraband. You should be searching for guilt." Then he slid out a note of his own. One line: "Ask him about the detonator." The lieutenant reading it stiffened. That detail, the detonator, was part of a sealed evidence summary. Nothing on it had ever appeared in court. And only one inmate on Bombers Row could possibly fear it resurfacing. That's when staff realized the conflict wasn't ideological at all. It was personal. Someone in that hallway believed that 9174 had damaging knowledge. Someone else believed he'd come to expose them. And a few feared something even worse, that the Bureau had sent him intentionally. The psychological pressure escalated without warning. Guards found shapes scratched into concrete, straight lines, intersecting angles, almost schematic. Another inmate began reciting dates in a monotone loop. None matched their cases. All matched bombing timelines. By the fourth day, unit officers were stretched thin. Every inmate seemed to be reacting to something invisible. Every reaction pointed to a 9174. And then, at evening count, he spoke again. No theatrics. No whisper. Just a calm statement through the food slot: "Look in the archive room. Box WIT-09. They'll understand why they're afraid." The lieutenant froze. That identifier, WIT-09, belonged to an off-record witness index. Access to that list required clearance far above the pay grade of anyone inside the unit. No inmate should know it existed. Some lieutenants didn't even know it existed. But by dawn, staff had no choice but to check. The restricted archive room was supposed to stay locked, its contents untouched. Yet there, on the center table, sat the WIT-09 box, pulled out, open, and left as if someone wanted it found. Inside, nearly everything was in order except one item, a single missing page. When officers finally located it, tucked in the folder's back pocket, they realized why the unit had been unraveling. The page wasn't evidence. It wasn't a statement. It was a signature. A signature linking one of the inmates on Bombers Row to an uncharged accomplice whose name had never appeared in public records. And that name shouldn't have survived this long. The lieutenant stared at the signature until the ink almost vibrated. The name was unmistakable, an accomplice who'd vanished from every official timeline, every press briefing, every courtroom record. Someone the government had quietly erased years earlier. Someone whose involvement would have rewritten a major domestic terror case from top to bottom. Worse, the signature didn't look newly discovered. It looked deliberately preserved. Word spread through the administrative wing faster than anyone could contain it. By morning, 3 federal vehicles were parked behind the Sally Port. Internal Affairs arrived. Counterterrorism analysts arrived. Even a Department of Justice observer hovered through the hallways taking notes no one would ever see. But inside Bombers Row, the reaction was even more telling. The unit went silent. Not calm. Not stable. Silent in the way pressure builds before a blast. Every inmate seemed to understand what the recovered page meant. A secret that once protected someone on this corridor had finally slipped free. A 9174 hadn't just disturbed a fragile balance, he'd exposed the fact that the balance existed at all. At noon, the tactical team escorted him to an interview room. He walked without resistance, head low, steps measured. To the guards flanking him, he didn't look triumphant. He looked exhausted. When the door closed behind him, the lead investigator sat down across the metal table. "How did you know about the signature?" he asked. A 9174 didn't blink. "You already know," he said quietly. "You brought me here because of it." The room chilled. Not because of the words, because of the calm behind them. The investigator leaned forward. "Tell me exactly what you think we brought you here for." A 9174 exhaled slowly, like someone unburdening a truth they'd tried to bury inside themselves. "Years ago, an agent contacted me. Not as a recruit. As a warning." He paused. "He told me the government would rather disappear the truth than admit they missed a second conspirator. He said if anything happened to me inside, he'd make sure the evidence survived." The investigator frowned. "You're telling me someone on the outside gave you access to sealed material?" "No," a 9174 said. "I'm telling you they gave me a reason to pay attention." He described a pattern: news articles, docket updates, timing of transfers. Not instructions. Signals. Subtle enough to overlook, precise enough to interpret. He pieced together information the same way the other inmates had once built devices, bit by bit, angle by angle, until the structure made sense. "And the others?" the investigator asked. A 9174 shook his head. "They knew the truth before I ever got here. They made a pact years ago. Silence in exchange for survival. Breaking it would bring consequences none of them wanted to face." For a moment, the room was still. Even the ventilation hummed quieter. Then the investigator opened a folder and slid the recovered page across the table. "You understand," he said, "that this changes everything." A 9174 nodded. "It was always going to." Before he could say another word, alarms erupted through the building, an emergency tone used only when staff feared inmate coordination. Guards sprinted down the hallway. The corridor cameras showed 3 inmates in their cells pacing in synchronization, tracing the same geometric pattern on the floor with their fingertips. It wasn't a signal. It wasn't a threat. It was resignation. The pact had broken. Within hours, prosecutors began reviewing old case files. Investigators reopened timelines. The existence of a second conspirator, once buried, was impossible to ignore now. Careers would be questioned. Protocols reevaluated. Reputations cracked. For the inmates on Bombers Row, nothing changed visibly. Their cells stayed sealed. Their routines stayed rigid. But inside the unit, the psychological hierarchy shifted forever. In a 9174? He didn't ask for a transfer or privileges or protection. He simply sat in his cell that night, staring at the concrete, looking relieved for the first time since his arrival. Not because he'd won anything, but because the truth had finally outlived the silence built to contain it. In a place designed to bury secrets, one had finally refused to stay dead. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.